So we're going to talk about the biblical view of the days of Noah. That's a phrase that Jesus used, and we want to understand what it really meant. You may recall that 4 disciples came to Jesus privately: Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, Peter's brother. But in that discussion that Jesus, in responding to their question about his second coming, he opened his discussion and he closed his discussion, 2-chapter discussion, with the admonition, take heed that no man deceive you. So you want to have your guard up on this one. But when you get down to verse 37 of Matthew 24, Jesus makes an interesting remark. He says, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. The whole passage has to do with his second coming. But as he's preparing his disciples for his departure and reminding them that he is coming back and talking the details about his second coming, among the things he remarks, he refers to the days of Noah. And we don't understand what he's talking about, because most of us don't have any idea. We have no idea what the days of Noah were really like. Well, it was a day of great sinfulness. Indeed it was. But if that's all there was, we better get some life jackets. Right? So Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Now the first thing I want you to notice before we get in this, I want you to notice verse 1 and 2 are a single sentence. It's amazing how much confusion has been generated by splitting that single sentence into the 2 verses. Genesis 6, verse 1 and 2. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Well, the first thing it hits us is sons of God. What does that phrase really mean? The sons of God. You want you to notice when men began to multiply, that's men in general. No particular subset, we're just men multiplied on the face of the earth, and they had daughters. We're talking daughters in general. We're not talking about a specific group of daughters. We're born of them, that the sons of God, whoever they were, we'll come back to that, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, they were attractive. I assume that was a general attribution. And they took them wives of all which they chose. That's kind of a strange phrase, by the way, in the Hebrew especially. It implies that the wives didn't have much choice about it. They took them wives of all which they chose. And so now, what about this word, sons of God? In the Hebrew, it's Bnei Ha-Elohim, Ha-Elohim, sons of God. But it's a phrase, to understand what it means, we need to examine the rest of the Bible. And you'll discover something interesting. That phrase is used of a direct creation of God. Okay, what did that include? Adam was a son of God. He was a direct creation of God. He fell, became sinful. You and I, as natural-born sons and daughters, are sons and daughters of Adam in the natural. We have a genetic defect. It's called sin. Therefore, we die. The term son of God in the Scripture is always used of a direct creation of God. That includes Adam, and it includes the angels. In fact, that particular phrase, if you search the entire Old Testament in the Hebrew, it's always used of angels. There are some similar passages used slightly differently, but that particular term we maintain is a technical term referring to angels. The sons of God, Bnei Ha-Elohim. It always is used of angels in the Old Testament. In Job 3 times, Job 1:6, 2:1, and 38:7. In Luke 20 verse 36 is the equivalent emphasis. Now, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born of them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And now we get to, we talked about Bnei Ha-Elohim, sons of God. The daughters of men, I want you to notice what that is, Banat Adam in the Hebrew. Okay. Now when you get down to verse 4, it says there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them. The same became the Hagibarim, the mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. There were Nephilim. That's the Hebrew word. Unfortunately, it's translated as giants in many English translations. They did happen to be giants, but that's not what the word means. The word in the Hebrew is Nephilim, and it's important to understand this word. It comes from a root meaning nephal, the fallen ones. The verb nephal in the Hebrew is to fall or be cast down, to fall away, or desert. If you're a deserter, or if you so forth, the verb is nephal. Nephilim are the fallen ones. So there were fallen ones. Now, what on earth are they? Also in that verse was the Hagibarim, the mighty ones. And these Nephilim, in other words, when these angels, now these are fallen angels, these are bad guys, you'll see in a minute. When they found some way to procreate with human women, they gave birth to hybrids. They were different than either of their parents because they were part human and part not human. And these were the Nephilim. And this idea shocks many people. It's very disturbing to many people, but let's try to keep an open mind and see what the Scripture says and see what implications it has in our understanding, not just of the flood of Noah, but the rest of the Old Testament. Now, again, the Septuagint takes this word, Nephilim, and treats it, translated as gigantes. Because it's gigantes, when they translated from the Septuagint to the English, they called them giants. It sounded like giants. That's not what the word means, by the way, but you can understand why they did that. They really transliterated. So they translated in most English Bibles as giants. The word comes from gigas, which means earthborn. And it's the same word that they use in Greek mythology for titans. Titans in Greek mythology were the offspring of gods, Greek gods, cohabiting with women. They were the demigods, half god, half man. Titans, Atlas, Hercules, these were in mythology these kinds of creatures. So that's what the word used for. The word genea means to breed or be of a certain kind. And the English word genes or genetics comes from the same Greek root. And there may be a linkage here that may surprise you that we'll get into this a little bit. Well, Genesis 3 said, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So from this announcement, there's 120 years before the big event, which we'll talk about. And then verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the way it would be in your Bible. The word is Nephilim. We're going to talk a lot about Nephilim in the earth in those days. And notice this, and also after that, these things occurred in those days, and they gave rise to the flood. But there's a phrase in here we're going to come back to later. And also after that, it didn't end with the flood. It was so universal that the flood dealt with it, but we're going to discover it wasn't limited to that. There's been some incidents since then. Anyway, and when the sons of God, the Benaiah Elohim, came in unto the Benoth Adam, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, when you get down to verse 9, we're going to be dealing with some other verses here in a minute, but I want to look ahead a little bit. In verse 9 of chapter 6, there is a remark about Noah that unless you're very careful, unless you do some exegetical homework, you'll miss the meaning of it. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Now here's that phrase again. We ran into that phrase with Enoch, didn't we? Noah walked with God. He was a just man. That doesn't mean he was sinless, but it does mean he was righteous before God because he was faithful and obedient. But there's a phrase in here that most people miss. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. Now that word perfect in the Hebrew is tamim. It always refers to a physical blemish. Tamim means without a blemish, sound, healthful, without spot, unblemished in other words, unimpaired. Well, wait a minute. what does it mean when it says that his genealogy was unimpaired? You see, it wasn't tainted by these goings-on with these fallen angels. The human race was getting contaminated. In fact, I believe it was Satan's strategy to contaminate the human race to prevent a Redeemer that was promised in Genesis 3. But Noah is an exception. He may not have been the only exception, but what was distinctive with Noah and his gang is that they were untainted by these goings-on of the Nephilim, of the fallen angels. Now you say, gee, this sounds pretty weird stuff, Chuck. You're saying that these angels cohabited with women and gave birth to hybrids. Well, if that's a pretty weird idea. But if it's true, it's going to be confirmed in at least 2 places elsewhere in the Bible, right? 2 or 3 witnesses the law requires. If you turn to Jude, verse 6 and 7, that's the book just before the book of Revelation in the New Testament. Jude is making an argument that I'm not going to try to recreate here to take the time, but in his argument, he makes reference in verse 6 of this little book. He says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day." So Jude here, Jude's the brother of Jesus Christ. He's writing this little short epistle. He's speaking of angels that did something wrong. They kept not their first estate, but they left their own habitation. I'll come back to that word in a minute. He hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Then he goes on to amplify this for us in verse 7. He says, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth an example, for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." So here we have an allusion by Jude that these angels, which apparently went after strange flesh, which God, because of that, they are reserved in everlasting chains and under darkness. So they're given a very special treatment. Well, this left their own habitation, going after strange flesh. These are angels it's talking about here. The word habitation, here's another technicality. You'll find, you won't find this in most textbooks, but let me just give it. The word in the Greek in the habitation is okaterion. It only occurs twice in the New Testament. Here in Jude, and in 2 Corinthians 5:2. What does this word okaterion mean? It means habitation, like a habit or a habitation. Well, it's used only twice in the Bible. In Jude 6 we just read, it's what these angels left. These angels left their habitation. Here it says, in a positive sense, it's speaking of the believer. "For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our," and the same word, okaterion, "which is from heaven." When we put this together, the angels that sinned shed the place they were living in, the body they were living in order to participate in this sin with human beings. That term is the body that you and I aspire to. We would use the term resurrection body. See, for in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our habit or habitation, house, which is from heaven. You and I, as believers, aspire to having an okaterion, which is given to us by God. It's our immortal bodies. But that term is what these angels shed in order to participate in this mischief in Genesis 6. Now, what's interesting about this weird view that I'm sharing with you about Genesis 6, we'll discover that that same idea is embodied in the myths and legends of every culture, ancient culture on the planet Earth. We're best known as the Greek Titans. The Greek mythology speaks of these demigods that are partly terrestrial, partly celestial. They apparently rebelled against their father Uranus, and after a prolonged contest they were defeated by Zeus and condemned into Tartarus. Again, that's what the word comes from. And by the way, it's interesting that Zeus is not the creator. I've been doing a little study in Greek mythology. I'm fascinated. I always thought, well, Zeus is their name for God. Not exactly, because Zeus is still not the creator. So it's interesting. They don't reach that far in their thing. Anyway, here's pictures as Zeus is often rendered, who is the top guru here. And then you have Hercules. You all heard about Hercules. You all heard about Atlas. In the Greek mythology, these would be in the Hebrew called Nephilim. They were offspring of human mothers and Greek mythological gods as parents. Now, if you study ancient legends, you'll discover the most earliest culture. Sumer has these legends. Assyria, Egypt, Incas, Mayan, Gilgamesh in Babylon, Persia, Greece, of course. Most of us are familiar with the Greek versions of this mythology. India, Bolivia, South Sudan. Even the American Indians speak of the star people that came down and so forth. And I came across a fascinating reference in a book that was considered at the time very reliable, the autobiography of William Cody, commonly known as Buffalo Bill. And if you look at Buffalo Bill's autobiography, Colonel William F. Cody in 1920, there's a paragraph, I put part of it in here. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day, and they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo, and taking the animal in one arm could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. The bone was too big, they didn't have wagons, so they didn't keep it. So he recorded it in his journal. So I don't know what to make of that, but I think it's interesting. You'll discover, if you study Indian lore, that the Indians were terrified of the 6-fingered people. That's why when they met a stranger, they held up the hand to prove they only had 5 fingers. This how business is Hollywood, but the idea of greeting a stranger with your hand so you could count fingers. You'll find that recorded in the pictoglyphs in Chaca, New Mexico, among other places. Anyway, moving on. But there's a genetic discovery I want to share with you. Scientists at Johns Hopkins University have discovered that there's a gene in mice which controls growth. It's called GDF8. In other words, growth differentiation factor 8. Disrupting GDF8 will result in super mice that are 2 to 3 times larger and much stronger than normal mice. And this was published in Nature, a reputable journal, in April 30th of 1997. So it's interesting to me. Don't confuse hormonal growth. Some people are large because of hormones, but when they get bigger, they get weaker. We're talking about a genetic difference here, and also, I'm assuming, a genetic difference in the Nephilim. You follow me? Because the Nephilim become supermen, very large and very terrifying. And so now it's interesting, by the way, speaking of genetics here now, it's interesting, in the Bible, there's the death penalty for lying with a beast, sleeping with an animal, in the sexual sense. If a woman lies with a beast, both shall be killed, not only the beast, but the woman. That's in Leviticus 20, verses 15 and 16. I'll give you an example. This all deals with confusion. And one of the questions we can ponder as we drive home tonight, does the genetic transfers of human DNA into animals suggest that we are entering the period which Jesus likened to the days of Noah? This genetic thing is going to get more complicated, especially as we cross species lines. We're introducing confusion. We're going to open the door for diseases that we have no answer to, and so forth. And so we're entering a very nightmarish era. And that's exactly what Revelation talks about in terms of Revelation chapter 6 and so on. There's another issue that surprises me that more experts, people who have really specialized in this field, have not seen the discernment. And that's the distinction between fallen angels and demons. All through the Bible we find fallen angels. We just talked a lot about them so far today. When you get the New Testament, you run into these strange things that we generally call demons. Are they equivalent or are they distinctive? There are experts, Merrill Unger being one of them, that are really, that's their world, is demonology, that don't make the distinction I'm going to suggest to you here, so you have to decide for yourself. The nature of angels. What do we know about angels? We'll go through the Bible, we discover they always appear in human form. They never look like anything. They don't look like lizards or elephants. They normally look like they're in human form. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. They're always in pairs, too, usually, by the way. Sodom and Gomorrah, remember? At the resurrection, they were there, a couple of them. At the ascension, there's a couple of them, right? Always look like men, right? They spoke so you could understand them. They took men by the hand. They ate meals with them, right? Paul even admonishes you in his New Testament epistles in terms of hospitality. Many of you have entertained angels unawares. That's Paul's perception there, okay? They are capable of direct physical combat. The Passover in Egypt was accomplished by an angel doing the Lord's bidding. Angel of death is referred to in some places. One night after dinner, one angel slaughters 185,000 Syrian soldiers. I don't know how many soldiers were there. It wouldn't surprise me if there were twice that many if they slit every other throat. That's what the Turks used to do, just to scare everybody to death. You wake up in the morning and find every other, that's demoralizing to a group. Because the word gets around, see? But anyway, the slaughter of 185,000. You don't mess with angels. By the way, Jesus said they don't marry. That causes a lot of confusion. I'll come back to that. He says the angels in heaven don't marry. But angels are always referred to in the masculine. Now, in contrast to these things, when we run into demons in the New Testament, they're very different. They seem to be powerless except to the extent they can indwell someone. They apparently always seek embodiment. That's why they petitioned to go into the swine and all that at Gadara. You know the story. Jesus said, for in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God. He's referring to believers. In the resurrection, they neither marry or given in marriage, but are as angels of God in heaven. Meaning, what he means by that is they are immortal. Someone that is mortal needs to procreate. Someone that's immortal doesn't procreate. That's his point. Now, he doesn't say, he's talking about the angels that are in heaven, the ones that are well behaved. I personally would not put any limitations on the technology available to an angel that's bent on mischief. That's my real point, I think. The word habitation, I've covered this before, the akaterion, refers to the body and as a dwelling place for the spirit. It occurs only twice. In Jude 6, which the angel is disrobed, and in 2 Corinthians 5:2, the heavenly body to which we as believers long to be clothed with. And the word habitation in one place is the same as the word house in the other place.